At one end of the street, the glass of office towers catches the sun like a promise. Air conditioning runs without pause. Elevators glide silently between floors, and in the lobby you find coffee brewed from imported beans and marble reception desks that look as if they were lifted straight out of Dubai or Shanghai. At the other end of the very same street, children carry plastic jerry cans to fetch water. Electricity cuts out several times a day. Corrugated metal roofs heat up to oven temperatures, and night brings a different kind of darkness, a darkness in which the city breathes to another rhythm. These are not two different countries. This is one city, one state, one economy. Contemporary Africa is less and less divided into north and south. It is increasingly divided into zones of light and zones of shadow, places plugged into global money, and places plugged only into survival. And between those zones, a new actor enters the frame, China. Not as a colony, not as an army, but as an architect of the continent's emerging class map. When Chinese money began flowing into Africa, the language was that of development. Roads, railways, ports, power plants, industrial parks, jobs, modernization. In official presentations, Africa was supposed to leapfrog decades and step directly into modernity. And yes, something changed. New business districts appeared. Gated compounds multiplied. Logistics hubs and factories rose on the edges of cities. But alongside them, something else was built. A new elite. An elite that did not grow out of local entrepreneurship, not out of craftsmanship or industrial production, but out of contracts, out of brokerage, out of access to foreign capital. Across many African countries, a class emerged that is wealthy not because it produces, but because it serves as the gate between China and the state. It has access to tenders, it has access to ministries, it has access to land, it has access to infrastructure projects, a new kind of credit aristocracy. Next to it, another group expands, an urban middle class that benefits from cheaper Chinese goods, new jobs, and the growth of services. It has smartphones, motorcycles, lease payments, and ambition, yet its stability is fragile, dependent on exchange rates, foreign-funded projects, and political decisions that can shift overnight. And underneath all of it remains the majority. People who do not see ports, contracts, or industrial parks. They see prices rising. They watch land being bought out for investment. They watch rents climb. They watch food become more expensive because the infrastructure increasingly serves export corridors, not local markets. This is where the fracture begins. Because Chinese money did not spread evenly, it built islands of wealth in an ocean of poverty. Modern districts that resemble the future, surrounded by suburbs still living inside the logic of the 19th century. In the official statistics, GDP rises. In real life, many people remain where they were. And that is why this episode is not about whether China is helping Africa or using it. That question is too simple and too comfortable. This episode is about something harder: how foreign capital rewires the class structure of a continent, how it produces new elites and reshapes what middle class even means, how it locks the poorest into a system that becomes more difficult to escape each year. Because real power today is not defined by who has an army. It is defined by who decides who moves up and who stays at the bottom. And in Africa, that ladder has begun shifting fast. It started with maps, urban plans, infrastructure tenders, delegation visits bringing glossy visions of modern districts, ports, and industrial parks. In conference rooms, folders were spread across polished tables, gleaming renders of tomorrow. In those images, Africa looked like an intersection of Dubai and Shanghai. Wide boulevards, glass towers, high-speed rail, container ports glowing at night like space stations. But the real transformation did not happen on paper. It happened inside the architecture of power. Every investment needs intermediaries. Every contract needs signatures. Every infrastructure project needs local partners, people who understand the system, the language of officials, the mechanics of procurement, and the informal rules that govern everything behind the scenes. And it is precisely here, inside the crack between global capital and the local state, that a new African elite was born. These are not classic entrepreneurs. They are not the people who built companies from scratch. They are not innovators or industrialists. They are access operators, gatekeepers, people who control who moves through the bureaucracy, who gets permits, who wins tenders, who secures land. In practice, the mechanism often looks like this. A Chinese firm enters a country with a road project, a port expansion, a housing district, a power plant. It needs a local partner, someone who knows the terrain, someone who can navigate ministries, municipalities, state agencies. And that is when a new figure of African capitalism appears, the infrastructure broker. He negotiates, he aligns interests, he handles the paperwork. Officially, he is a consultant, an advisor, a joint venture partner. Unofficially, he becomes a man who builds a fortune not through production, but through control over project flows. In many countries, these actors stepped within a few years into lifestyles once reserved for narrow political circles. Gated neighborhoods, guarded residences, imported cars, children in international private schools, holidays in Dubai, Istanbul, or Europe. Yet this elite is not stable in the way an industrial bourgeoisie tends to be. It does not sit on factories, patents, or long-term productive capacity. It sits on the continuity of contracts. When projects flow, money flows. When politics shifts, this elite can disappear as quickly as it arrived. That produces a particular mentality. The priority is fast profit and access to the next project. The priority is closeness to power. Investment in local industry, technological education, long-term innovation, all of that becomes secondary. What matters is keeping a seat at the table where infrastructure contracts are distributed. Chinese capital accelerated this dynamic because the scale was enormous. Local markets were not prepared. Sums entered the system that could transform lives with a single signature. For many, it was the first encounter with capital of that magnitude, and it created a new social hierarchy. At the top, a political business infrastructure elite. Below, an aspiring middle class employed in administration, services, and foreign-funded projects. At the bottom, the majority who glimpse this world only through bus windows and phone screens. Nowhere is it more visible than in cities. New business districts rise beside old, informal settlements. International offices stand a few streets away from open-air markets where vegetables are sold on wooden tables. Highways designed for logistics slice through neighborhoods without sewage infrastructure. This is not an accident. It is an outcome of a development model that privileges export infrastructure and prestige projects over local social needs. The new elites understand this city perfectly because for them, the city is not a lived space, but an investment space. Every square meter of land is a potential project. Every district is a future contract. Every planning decision is a profit opportunity. In that sense, Chinese capital does not only build roads and ports, it reshapes elite psychology. Instead of long-term responsibility for national development, a project logic takes over. From contract to contract, from tender to tender, from ribbon cutting to ribbon cutting. The most dramatic element of this story is that many people at the bottom initially supported these changes. New roads meant hope. New factories meant jobs. New districts meant a promise of social mobility. But after a few years, a different reality surfaced. Land prices rose, rents surged, urban living costs exploded, and wages for most workers grew slower than the profits captured by the elite. In practice, infrastructure-led development did not produce a mass middle class. It produced a narrow layer of very rich people and a broad layer balancing at the edge of stability. This is a new form of inequality. Not built around race, as in the colonial era, but around access to infrastructure capital. If you are close to projects, you win. If you are far, you fall behind. Africa's new elites often speak the language of development, modernization, partnership, transformation, the future. But in private conversations, they talk about something else. Who has access to the minister? Who has contacts in the bank? Who has the phone number of the Chinese consortium? Who will learn first about the next tender? This is not innovation capitalism. It is access capitalism. And that is why it is fragile. When political coalitions change, infrastructure elites can vanish as quickly as they emerged. What remains are empty buildings, unfinished projects, and state debts that will be repaid over decades. In that sense, these elites do not always lay durable foundations for development. Often they build pyramids of contracts, impressive from the outside, but not necessarily strengthening the economy from within. And that leads to another outcome: social polarization. The wealthy begin living in sealed zones, gated compounds, private schools, private clinics, private infrastructure. The rest of society relies on public services that often cannot keep up with the speed of urbanization. Two worlds emerge, one plugged into global money, the other plugged into local survival. And between them, tension grows. One of the most consequential effects of China's presence in Africa, not because China set out to produce inequality, but because a development model built on mega infrastructure projects naturally concentrates wealth. This part of the episode shows that the core issue is not only who invests in Africa. The deeper issue is how investment reshapes society. And that takes us to the next stage of the story. Because alongside the new elites, another group has grown, a middle class on credit. Aspiring, consumer-driven, proud of its upward movement, but standing on thin ice. When new highways opened and the first towers with foreign developer logos began reflecting sunlight, a new keyword entered African cities: mobility. Social mobility, career mobility, civilizational mobility. Suddenly, someone who 10 years earlier lived in a district without sewage could commute on a new ring road, hold a smartphone, have a bank account, and carry monthly installments for an apartment in a newly built block. Thus, a new urban middle class began to take shape. Not the old one of civil servants and teachers, not the traditional one tied to local trade, but a class formed by infrastructure projects, foreign investment, and consumption financed through credit. Its members work inside the ecosystem surrounding contracts, in banks, logistics firms, telecoms, customer service centers, project offices, procurement departments, administration supporting major builds. They are second-tier engineers, accountants, compliance clerks, purchasing specialists, mid-level managers, close enough to projects to benefit, but too far from decision-making tables to influence how profits are distributed. It is a class of aspiration. It wants to live like the global middle class. It wants modern housing compounds, cars on installment plans, holidays, Netflix, air conditioning, and stable internet. For a moment, it feels possible. Banks begin offering mortgages. Mobile operators sell subscription plans. Stores sell electronics on installment. Developers build modern living blocks. Chinese construction firms erect entire residential districts faster than local administrations can build schools or hospitals. The city grows. Nightlights intensify. Statistics speak of middle-class expansion, but beneath the narrative sits a structure far more fragile. Because this middle class, in huge part, does not own capital. It owns obligations. The apartment is financed, the car is leased, the electronics are on monthly payments, the lifestyle is purchased against future income. That makes upward mobility conditional. As long as the economy grows, as long as projects continue, as long as foreign money keeps flowing, the system functions. But when a currency shock hits, investment slows, or political arrangements change, this class fractures first. In practice, Africa's new middle class lives in permanent tension, pride in advancement paired with fear of falling. At work, it must remain loyal. In the bank, it must stay punctual. In private life, it must maintain the image of success. Because in the age of social media, failure is public. Instagram and TikTok broadcast a continuous success narrative. New apartments, new cars, new restaurants, new cafes. The pressure not to slip out of the game becomes psychological and relentless. This is the class that works longer hours than the elites and earns more than the poor. yet often lives with the highest stress. It cannot afford protest because it has a mortgage. It cannot afford a strike because it has installments. It cannot afford instability because it fears job loss. In that sense, the middle class becomes the system's social shock absorber. It stabilizes the state because it has too much to lose to gamble on chaos. China's investment model fits neatly into this mechanism. Mega infrastructure projects create thousands of mid-level jobs: administration, logistics, construction supervision, project management. This is where the new middle class grows. Yet these jobs are tied to foreign financing, political decisions, and global markets. A new kind of class dependency emerges. It is not only states that become dependent on foreign loans. Individuals become dependent on foreign projects. When the road construction ends, the contract ends. When the port project is completed, administrative demand collapses. When funding stops, the boom stops. And then the middle class shrinks. You can see it in cities where entire districts were built on credit and speculation. Empty apartments, unfinished compounds, people renting out their own homes just to pay their installments. These are symptoms of a development model driven more by capital flow than by durable economic capacity. At the same time, this middle class becomes the cultural carrier of a new identity. It speaks a global language. It consumes global products. It thinks in terms of careers rather than communities, and that distances it from poorer layers of society. A mental barrier forms. Poverty begins to look like personal failure rather than systemic exclusion. Success is presented as resourcefulness, not as access to structural privilege. This is the point at which society begins to fracture culturally. The rich live behind walls. The middle class lives on credit. The poor live outside the development map, and the state increasingly functions as contract broker rather than redistribution mechanism. Chinese investment accelerated this fracture because it introduced a pace of change that did not allow parallel social institutions to grow. Roads appeared faster than education systems. Ports expanded faster than healthcare capacity. Business districts rose faster than housing policy. The result is a city that looks modern while remaining structurally unequal. The middle class believes it is close to the elite, but in reality, it is closer to poverty than to wealth. One layoff, one illness, one currency crisis, and the entire structure begins to shake. That is the central myth of Africa's infrastructure boom, that it built a stable middle class. What it built was a conditional middle class. Because beneath the shining surface of modern districts, fear grows. Fear of falling, fear of losing status, fear of sliding back down the ladder. And there, at the bottom, the majority still waits. From above, from satellite images or investor presentations, Africa looks orderly. Road grids, new districts, ports, industrial zones, GDP charts, upward arrows. But step down to street level, to dust, mud, and improvised tin roofs, and another map appears, a map absent from development documents. It is the map of people who are not beneficiaries of the infrastructure boom, people who did not receive contracts, credit, or apartments in new districts, only higher prices and survival pressure. This is where systemic poverty begins. Not the romantic poverty sometimes described in travel reporting as exotic. Not temporary poverty produced by a natural disaster, but structural poverty embedded in a development model that builds islands of wealth and oceans of exclusion. The informal settlements of Africa's major cities are not accidents. They are byproducts of urbanization fueled by foreign capital. When new infrastructure projects emerge, thousands migrate from rural areas toward cities. They heard about construction sites, jobs, better lives, opportunity, but labor markets do not grow as fast as migration. Housing expands faster in luxury segments than in affordable ones, and the state cannot keep pace with housing policy. The outcome is simple. People build the city themselves, On scraps of land, on floodplains, under bridges, along rail tracks, districts appear that do not exist in urban plans, without sewage, without formal water access, without reliable electricity, without postal addresses. They exist physically, but not administratively. And huge portions of Africa's urban population live precisely there. This is the paradox of modernity. New highways bypass the informal city, yet the informal city grows faster than roads. Shopping malls attract customers, yet meters away people cook on improvised stoves. Business districts shine at night like futuristic islands, while a few streets away there are no streetlights. Systemic poverty follows a logic. It is not only the absence of money, it is the absence of access to land, to formal employment, to quality education, to credit, to healthcare, to stable public services. In many cases, Chinese infrastructure investments deepen this logic, not always intentionally, but structurally. Roads are built for freight, not local needs. Ports expand for export corridors, not local distribution. Industrial parks are fenced and guarded, separated from the rest of the city. Physical barriers emerge between the world of projects and the world of daily life. For residents of poor districts, these investments often feel abstract. They see trucks and machines. They rarely see stable jobs. Construction work is temporary. When the project ends, workers return to the street. And the industrial base that could absorb surplus labor often does not develop locally. What grows instead is the informal economy: street vending, motorcycle transport, day labor, services without contracts. A parallel economy that keeps millions alive but offers no security, no health insurance, no pensions, no legal protection, no stability. When the economy slows, they feel it first. Systemic poverty is also poverty of time. People in informal settlements often work more hours than the middle class, but their time is fragmented. They sell it in pieces, 1 hour here, 2 hours there. No pathway upward, no career ladder, no stable daily rhythm. And that produces something deeper: the psychology of survival. When daily life is a struggle for food, water, and rent, it becomes difficult to plan for the future. Children's education becomes secondary when electricity bills are overdue. Health becomes a luxury when treatment means losing a day of income. Politics stops being civic participation and becomes a marketplace of promises who will distribute more rice before elections. This is the world that rarely appears in investment presentations. It does not fit the success narrative. Chinese infrastructure projects are often presented as symbols of development, and in one sense, they are. But they also accelerate a process in which cities grow faster than their ability to absorb people. Urbanization without industrialization. This is the defining phrase of the era. Cities grow, buildings rise, roads expand. But industrial production, the engine that could create mass stable employment, frequently lags behind. The result is a consumer city without a producer city. And that generates tension. Young people see wealth through phone screens, new cars, luxury districts, influencers, but they cannot access those worlds. Frustration builds. Exclusion becomes emotional. Sometimes anger becomes political. Systemic poverty is not silent. It accumulates pressure. Protests often emerge from these neighborhoods. Radical movements recruit here. Migration streams begin here, people seeking exits when the system offers no ladder upward. The bitter irony is that many residents of poor districts initially believed in the infrastructure boom. They believed roads would bring work, ports would bring trade, projects would bring schools and hospitals. Some promises were kept, but not at a scale capable of absorbing millions. In practice, a system formed in which the rich live in sealed enclaves, the middle class balances on credit, and the poor are pushed beyond the development map. This is not only Africa's problem, it is a global development pattern built around capital concentration and infrastructure concentration. But in Africa, it appears sharper because urbanization is faster and the population is younger.